All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Diana, and I'm the Learning Experience Manager here at Bloomerang. You might recognize me from attending Bloomerang Academy classes or listening to some of our release and health videos. But either way, thanks for joining us. We're glad to have you here with us. Today, we are talking about Bloomerang and Zapier. And these are going to be integrations for your favorite apps. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Jeff Hagewood. Jeff is a Zapier certified expert and Bloomerang integrations consultant at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is a Bloomerang partner specializing in system automations for Bloomerang. Jeff has been a Bloomerang user since 2013 and most recently was part of the Bloomerang team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app, which is the focus of today's webinar. So thank you so much for joining us today. We're very excited to have Jeff here today to share his expertise and explore the Bloomerang Zapier app. Welcome, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Diana. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. So in planning this webinar today, Diana and I brainstormed how best to approach the topic of integrations. As you might imagine, it's a pretty big topic. So today's session is going to cover some actionable tips and best practices that you can apply to your Bloomerang database right away. Now, if we surveyed the group here, we'd probably find that in addition to Bloomerang, you're using various other software platforms. You might have tools for email marketing, event coordination, online giving. Maybe you're tracking your major gift pipeline in a Google Sheet. You might have volunteers or accounting software, all sorts of other tools. And this probably isn't even a comprehensive list. Today, we want to show you how Bloomerang integrations, specifically with workflow automations, can streamline processes, help you save time, and reduce overall effort. The more we can lean on technology to streamline the busy work of day-to-day operations, the more time we can spend doing the fun stuff, engaging constituents, decreasing attrition, and cultivating passion for our causes. I would even say that it's probably even more relevant today as most of us have moved to remote work, even virtual collaboration, maybe even with your constituents or among your team. Automations become really important. So for our agenda today, we're going to introduce Zapier, how it works and what you can do with it. We're going to look at some popular Zapier-enabled integrations between Bloomerang and Eventbrite, QuickBooks Online, PayPal, and G Suite. Then we're going to wrap up with some key details on how you can get started with Zapier and Bloomerang and open it up for Q&A. We're going to take a couple of breaks throughout this presentation to answer questions. So we'll get a chance to answer all your questions as we go through. So let's dive in. Let's go ahead and take a quick poll and see how many of you have heard of Zapier before.
All right.
All right.
So we have the poll up for about a minute. We have 51% who haven't heard of Zapier before. This is their first time. 41 who've heard of it but haven't used it. About 9% who have used it.
Awesome.
Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you. So what is Zapier? Zapier is automation software. Zapier sits in between your Bloomerang database and any other apps that you might be using, helping them talk to each other. In technical terms, Zapier is the middleware that enables many integrations with Bloomerang. In fact, because Zapier is integrated with Bloomerang, we're able to enable over 2,000 applications for integration with Bloomerang. I like to think of Zapier in this kind of analogy. Zapier's throwing an integration party. And since they're hosting the party, those that join the party have to follow some basic rules. And we're going to talk more about that today. But once you're in the party, you can connect to any other apps that are also at the party. It's a neat concept because it makes integrations for Bloomerang highly accessible through a single platform. Zapier is a builder, and they let you design integrations using steps. Each step is like a set of Lego blocks that you can build to create an integration workflow. A single integration, and you'll hear this used multiple times during this presentation, is called a zap. Zaps start with a trigger and then proceed to complete one or many actions. So before we even get into the technical details, let's look at a zap and see what it looks like. So let's say that I want to notify my team in a Slack channel when a constituent in Bloomerang has a transaction greater than $1,000. In this scenario, the trigger is a transaction from Bloomerang. When that's added to Bloomerang, this zap will run. Once that zap begins running, we'll send a channel message in Slack for each transaction that's entered in Bloomerang. Jump back in here. Zaps are linear, flowing from top to bottom, excuse me, from top to bottom, based on an initial trigger and then a subsequent set of actions. Excuse me, lost my voice there. The output might look something like this. You can see that I've included a link to the transaction in Zapier. This is a really great workflow if you'd like to notify board members or team members when there's donations above a certain amount. Now, zaps can be as simple as this example, but they can also expand to include zaps with multiple steps and multiple apps, zaps with filters, paths, or conditional logic, and zaps with data transformation and formatting. So the big question is, why would we get excited about Bloomerang and Zapier? Well, there's three reasons. The first we've already talked about, and that's that Zapier connects to 2,000 other apps, which means that Bloomerang is essentially enabled for integration with those 2,000 apps. The second reason is that anyone can build zaps. You don't need to know how to code to build any zaps in Zapier. And the third thing is that Zapier lets users design integrations that match their workflow. You aren't limited to one size fits all. You can map and format your integrations to match your unique workflow. So before we dive into the specifics, let's just quickly touch on how you get started with Zapier. First, you'll need a Zapier account, and you'll need to link your Bloomerang account to Zapier. The process is pretty simple to do. So I'm going to jump over here. On Zapier's homepage, zapier.com, you can sign up by clicking this button here. Zapier offers free accounts and nonprofits get a discount. You can sign up for Zapier here. And once you sign up for Zapier, you need to link your account, your Bloomerang account, to Zapier. That's done by going to the My Apps screen, selecting Bloomerang from the dropdown, this will ask you to log in and grant access to your Bloomerang account. It's that simple. Now that we've got our solution connected to Bloomerang, we can start building zaps. So what can we do with Bloomerang and Zapier? Well, we can actually do quite a bit. And we're going to go through each of those options now. With the Bloomerang Zapier app, you can build integrations with data flowing both out of Bloomerang and also build integrations with data flowing into Bloomerang. Each step in a Bloomerang Zap is going to be based on a trigger, an action, or a search. So let's go through each one of the triggers, actions, and searches that we've exposed for the Bloomerang app. First, let's talk about triggers. A trigger is an event in Bloomerang. So when an event happens, the trigger starts a zap. Each trigger event starts that zap to run and complete a subsequent set of actions. So for example, if I enter 3 new constituents in Bloomerang, and I use the new constituent trigger, my zap will run 3 times, once for each new constituent. The time it takes for a trigger to run in Zapier is based on your Zapier plan, but generally, a Zap will trigger to run in less than 15 minutes from the time you enter that event in Bloomerang. So pretty quick, almost real time. Integrations from Bloomerang can start a Zap based on the following Bloomerang events: a new constituent, an updated constituent, a new transaction, and a new transaction payment. New constituent is pretty straightforward. It's going to trigger to run when you create a new constituent and save it. We go into our Bloomerang account, simply selecting constituents, new, individual, or organization, and entering the constituent and saving it will trigger this Zap to run. Within the trigger in Zapier, we can filter which constituents we want to trigger on, whether those are individuals, organizations, or if we select no type, it will trigger on all new constituents. Updated constituent works similarly to new constituent. It'll trigger a Zap to run when you update a constituent and save it, an existing one. In Bloomerang, any change to a field on the profile, whether that's contact information, basic info, personal info, communication preferences, or custom fields, will trigger an updated constituent trigger to run. From within Zapier, if I'm selecting the updated constituent trigger, I have a couple of options, just like with new constituent. I can choose the types of constituents I want to trigger on. I can also include additional information about that constituent's giving history and their household information if I want to use those in later parts of a Zap. The giving history aggregates this constituent's 10-year giving history, their average giving, lifetime giving, and first, last, and largest transactions, while the household information will bring in additional detail about the constituents' household names, their status, and their engagement score. If you're not going to use these two options, you can simply leave them as false. New transaction will trigger a Zap to run when you create a new transaction and save it. In Bloomerang, a transaction could be any number of items: a donation, a pledge, a recurring donation, or a pledge payment, or a recurring donation payment. Same principle as with new constituent and updated constituent. As you enter this record, this new donation, the moment you save it, that will trigger your Zap to run. Within Zapier, if we select this trigger, we have various options to filter by the type of transaction, whether you want just donations or just pledges, the minimum and maximum amount of the transaction, and like updated constituent, whether or not you'd like to include additional details about the constituent's giving history or household information. The new transaction payment trigger will trigger a Zap to run when you create a new transaction and save it, but only for donations, pledge payments, and recurring donation payments. Unlike the new transaction trigger, which will trigger to run once when a new transaction is created, the new transaction payment will trigger a Zap for each payment on a newly created transaction. This is applicable for organizations that are using split payments in Bloomerang. You will use this trigger when you need to run a Zap for each payment in that split individually when a transaction has multiple split payments. So let's take a look at an example on the difference between new transaction and new transaction payment when you're considering this for your Zaps. If I was to enter a donation of $20 and I set up a new transaction and a new transaction payment trigger, each trigger would run once. If I entered a donation for $20 with 2 split payments, the new transaction trigger would trigger once, but the new transaction payment would trigger twice, once for each payment. Same principle for a donation with 3 split payments, same amount, 3 splits, 1 transaction trigger, or 3 transaction payment triggers. I'm sure there will be lots of questions about this, and we'll be sure to circle back to those on when you would use each trigger and in which scenarios and use cases you might apply those. The Bloomerang Zapier app also includes 4 actions. So an action is an event a Zap performs after it's triggered. So an action effectively is a task. You can think of an action a little bit like this. If you were to complete the steps of a Zap manually, let's say enter a donation in Bloomerang, each step in the Zap is taking that task off your plate. So Zapier is automating the process by completing those manual steps in an automated way. Each task is an action completed by Zapier. Generally speaking, when we're talking about actions, we're talking about writing records into Bloomerang. And there are 4 options. We can create constituents, update existing constituents, create donations, and create interactions. The title of this action doesn't leave much to be questioned. It's simply creating a constituent. We're going to create a constituent that's either a new individual or a new organization based on mapping. So I'll go ahead and show you what this looks like in Zapier. Here's an action step for create constituent. I have the opportunity to select what type of constituent I'm creating and map fields like name, personal information, communication preferences, and contact information to create this constituent record. You'll notice that these fields line up with the fields that you'll find in Bloomerang. All of the fields that are on the profile, including addresses, emails, and phone numbers, are fields that we can write in a Zap to Bloomerang. Create donation creates a new donation record for a specific constituent. Create donation has the ability to create a single donation, or it can also create split payments. We're not going to talk too much about split payments with the create donation action today, as that has some advanced functionality. But in thinking about what the use cases might be for a create donation with split payment, if you're running an e-commerce store like Shopify or WooCommerce, you could actually write a donation to Bloomerang where each item in the order is a separate split on the donation. So if I jump into Zapier and we take a look at create donation, you'll notice that I have the ability to write this donation to a specific constituent based on the ID of that constituent. Fields like date, method, amount, mappings for fund, campaign, and appeal, and custom fields are all available for mapping, which will relate to your instance of Bloomerang and these fields here: date, amount, fund, campaign, appeal, method, and custom fields. When we look at the Zapier integration for create donation, this action here, you'll notice at the top that we're appending to a constituent record. We can't create a donation in Bloomerang without having a constituent, so you'll notice the ability to map the constituent ID here. And we'll talk a little bit more about constituent ID mapping when we look at our templates for Eventbrite and PayPal. But for now, we can identify that we are appending this donation to a specific constituent. Create interaction is another action that we have available in the Bloomerang app. And the goal here is to create a non-financial activity on a constituent's timeline. The configuration is very similar to create donation. The last action is update constituent. This is going to update a constituent's name, contact information, and custom fields based on how you map the data in. It's important to note that updating a constituent's address, phone, or email with the update constituent action will promote those new values as primary and demote the existing values that you have on an account as secondary. It will not overwrite those values, although you do need to be careful with updated constituent. When it comes to contact information, you cannot overwrite this data in your Bloomerang system, which is really good news. When we look at the update constituent action in Zapier, another important thing to note is that along with create donation and create interaction, you will need to append a constituent ID to update the appropriate constituent. Additionally, if you leave a field blank, it will not make that field blank in Bloomerang. If I did not enter a first name field here in the Zapier app, that would not overwrite the first name as blank on the constituent's profile. So that's another good safeguard in place for this integration. Now we've talked about constituent ID, and you might be wondering, well, how can we get a constituent ID to define a constituent in Bloomerang? That's a great question. We can get a constituent ID by using a search. We have a search in the Bloomerang Zapier app that finds an existing record. And in this case, it allows us to create a constituent if none are found. So the logic for a find constituent step might look something like this. Find a constituent based on a duplicate check search. If we cannot find a constituent, create a new constituent record for the data that we provide. If we jump into Zapier, let's come back up here. And we select to find a constituent as an action. We select the type of constituent we want to search, and then provide the search the information that it needs to conduct a duplicate check. In this case, I need to submit a first name, a last name, and one of address, phone, or email. We recommend that you include as much information as you have available from prior steps of your Zap. So if you have address, phone, and email, map them all in, and Bloomerang will do the check for you based on all three keys. If Bloomerang does not find a constituent account, you can create one by selecting this checkbox here and mapping in information to create a constituent record, which is the exact same action as we talked about earlier for create constituent. So find, or if we can't find one, create one. And the output of this constituent search and this constituent create is the ID for the constituent, which we can use in later steps. And we'll go through that when we talk about templates. So I know we went through those pretty quickly, and the goal is just to get you some initial information and terminology about Zaps, triggers, actions, searches, the workflow that goes with them, and now we can dive into some templates. Before we do want to emphasize that any app that is in the Zapier directory can be integrated with Bloomerang. There are over 2,000 apps in the Zapier directory, and if you'd like to search that directory, you can go to zapier.com/apps and look through that list. When we think about automation, we think about apps, but we also think about use cases. So while we may want to integrate PayPal or Eventbrite or QuickBooks Online, we may also think about some other automations that may not be app specific. So for example, with Zapier, we can do a number of additional use cases, things like sending follow-up emails to team members or notifying board members of major gifts, or setting calendar events for to-dos, running real-time dashboards in a spreadsheet. You could even publish giving data live on your website using Zapier. Just to give you a flavor of some additional things we can do, you could do things like automating the printing of acknowledgements. You could log surveys that you accept online to interactions in Bloomerang. You could send a new donor welcome series. You could even process gifts with a card swiper like Square or others. You could even sync constituents to your email contacts. So whenever you're typing an email, you always have the appropriate person's email. There's a plethora of use cases that we can put together in Bloomerang. And we're curious which of these might be interesting to you. So we're going to do a quick poll. Diana, if you want to pull that up, and we can see where people's attention's at with respect to some of these use cases. And Diana, while we're doing that, maybe we open up for some questions as well, because it's likely that this all feels a bit overwhelming. So we want to make sure that we answer some questions and get people's questions answered.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it a little bit, talking about use cases for automations and something like that. But we have gotten questions around, why would I need to set up a Zap instead of manually creating it in Bloomerang? I mean, it's easy enough to create something in Bloomerang. Why would I want to use Zapier for it?
It's a great question. It is easy to enter data into Bloomerang. I would say where the tipping point starts to occur is when you need automation for some volume. So for instance, if you're taking a PayPal transaction and entering it to Bloomerang, if you're getting 20 transactions a month, it may not be that difficult to enter it into Bloomerang. But if you're getting 100 a month, or you hit a busy period and you're getting 200 a month, maybe during your annual campaign, that's where you start to reach some of those breaking points. And Zapier can automate that process for you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff. We've also had a couple of questions earlier about whether or not you can only zap to a constituent in Bloomerang if they're already in there. And I wanted to emphasize that we do have that action to find constituent or create constituent if they're not already there.
Yeah. And this is very, when we think about integrations, I often get the question, can I create a constituent if I don't find one? And the answer is that Zapier does the work for you. It really does the heavy lifting. So with Zapier, we have the ability to find, which is step one. And if we cannot find one, to create one. And that helps us consolidate that chain of activities that we need to do to ensure that constituents are in the database for appending donations to the timeline or appending an interaction to the timeline.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And it looks like from our polls, a majority of our attendees today are interested in integrating with a payment processor like Square, Stripe, or PayPal, followed by drip campaigns and email marketing automation. We had a question about that earlier, about how to set that up, but I think that might get us a little bit into the weeds, so we'll follow up with that via email.
Yeah, you better be careful. You'll get me talking about drip campaigns for 30 minutes. We don't want to do that. I get pretty excited about this. Yep.
We can set up a whole other class just on drip campaigns.
Absolutely.
But yes, it looks like a lot of you are interested in integrating a payment processor, followed by drip campaigns and building dashboards, notifications as well. So a lot of interest, and we've gotten a lot of our write-in answers as well. Thank you for all your feedback. We're excited to take a look into that and dig into it more. But I'll let Jeff continue for now.
Great. Let's dive into some use cases. So we've talked high level conceptually about what Zapier is, what it can do, some of the possibilities. Let's look at some templates. Now, I'm sure when we think about Zapier and we talk about it, it may feel exciting, maybe a bit intimidating at the same time. I do want to emphasize that to help you get into Zapier and integrate with Bloomerang, Diana and John have done a great job of developing Zap templates. Templates are pre-configured Zaps that you can deploy in your Zapier account that connect with Bloomerang. All of the use cases that we're going to go through next are Zap templates. So if you're interested in any of the solutions that we're talking about in the next 30 minutes or so, all of those are Zap templates that you can deploy with a pre-configured Zap. Very important to get that. So we're going to talk about Eventbrite. We're going to talk about QuickBooks Online, PayPal, and G Suite, and specifically on G Suite, Gmail, and Google Sheets. So Diana, let's do a quick poll and let's see how people on the webinar today stack against those apps, just to get a feel for where people are at and where the most interest is. Great. Well, while those questions are coming in, why don't we go ahead and continue and actually dive into a couple of these Zap templates. So first is going to be Eventbrite. Now, we recognize that most organizations are not hosting in-person events right now, and we went back and forth on whether we would cover Eventbrite in today's presentation, wanting to be sensitive to current events. We did decide to include Eventbrite for a couple of reasons. First, we're very hopeful that we'll be able to host in-person events safely in the near future. We're very aware that in-person events are great ways to build community, engage constituents that are most passionate about our causes, and we're really hopeful that those will kick into place when it's safe to do so. The second thing is that Eventbrite can be used for virtual events. Eventbrite, on its core level, simplifies registration and check-in. Whether that's a virtual or in-person event, we can use Eventbrite for both use cases. So we felt like it was a good mix for this presentation. The bottom line is that Eventbrite has 3 triggers: new order, new attendee registered, and new attendee check-in. And those are what start Zaps. And what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to sync that information into Bloomerang as both constituents, donations, and interactions. Eventbrite integration, when we think about it in totality, is generally 3 different Zaps. And they all run, depending on your configuration, they generally all run at the same time per event. So the first one is logging the event order. When a new order is made in Eventbrite, we want to find or create the constituent that is the purchaser in Bloomerang, and we want to create a donation on the purchaser's timeline for the Eventbrite order. Again, this is a Zap template that you can deploy. What I'm showing you here is exactly what you get when you deploy this template in Zapier. So you can see up here at the top, we have a new order in Eventbrite. We've placed a filter here to filter when the ticket is greater than a penny. We don't want to create donations for events that are free. You can search for an existing constituent based on the first name and last name and email address coming from Eventbrite. You'll notice that these fields are mapped in from the step. The trigger here brings in these fields, and we can map them into our template. Building Zaps is a lot like a word merge. We're taking field keys and mapping them into the places where we'd like to do the search in Bloomerang. So first name, last name, email. In this case, I've decided to bring in the cumulative giving history and household information if this constituent already exists. And then I can create the constituent if that constituent doesn't exist by simply mapping the fields into each of these spaces. Oh, better select last name. And so on. Once we have that constituent found or created, then we'll log the donation in Bloomerang. We'll do that with a Zap step. We'll take the constituent ID from the prior step. So if we find or create constituent, we can map that ID here. the date the Eventbrite order was created, the method was credit card. You can use custom mapping to define your fund, campaign, and approach for this event. And you can map any custom fields if you'd like to track the registration type, number of tickets, all sorts of information. You can add that all here. All of these fields, you'll notice, map directly into Bloomerang. So if I was to create a donation, you'll notice the date, the amount of the donation, the fund, campaign, and appeal will map in. And since I selected credit card, it'll append the method of credit card to this transaction. The second zap is to log a registration event for each of the people that register for the event. Now, the neat thing about Eventbrite is that there is a new attendee registered trigger for the original purchaser that registers for the event, as well as each individual guest that they add to the order. So if they bought 3 tickets, 2 guests, and themselves, this trigger will trigger 3 times, which allows you to create the constituent record for guests and the primary, as well as log an interaction of registration for the guests and the primary. A very scalable solution, allowing you to manage guests. So let's take a look at this template. Again, this is a template that is available to you as a part of the Bloomerang Zapier app. Now, we've talked through find or create constituent, but create interaction may have a different flavor. You may want to customize your interaction. So you've got the date, the subject, which might be the event name, the note. You could even map in some custom fields if you wanted to track the event status to identify that they accepted the event invitation, or even the event name. Now, why this is important is because the next zap is going to track attendance. And if you're logging an interaction for registration and attendance separately, you'd want the ability to report on this in Bloomerang. So when we think about adding an interaction, and we go to our custom fields, we can track the event status, and your fields might be set up differently, but they'll load into Zapier. We would track the status differently for a registration than we would in attendance. And that would help us do reporting on all sorts of things: rosters, who registered but didn't attend, who registered and did attend, who attended but didn't register initially. All sorts of different things can come out of this integration. So that attendance piece is not dissimilar from the zap we were looking at for registration. The trigger is new attendee check-in in Eventbrite. And in this case, instead of logging fields for registration, we log the same type of fields: the date, the check-in, the event name. And maybe this time we would check attended. And that would map into our Bloomerang account so we can make that association. So lots of benefits. We don't have to do any post-event imports if we use this type of tool. We can add primary and guests to Bloomerang. We can use Eventbrite mobile apps, which is an exciting option. We get to run reports in real time, and we can manage both free and paid events using one set of zaps, 3 zaps total. But the power of Zapier really doesn't end there. Let's say that we wanted to build a multi-app zap around Eventbrite. Let's say when we receive a new order, we want to tag a MailChimp subscriber that they're going to attend. We want to add the roster to a Google Sheet, want to notify staff, or send a custom confirmation email to the registrant. Maybe we have a ticket type for sponsorship and we'd prefer to draft and send an invoice for the sponsorship based on that purchase. We can do all of that using these Eventbrite triggers and stacking multiple zap steps together into one zap workflow. It's really hard not to overemphasize how powerful this tool can be when we consider a multi-app automation like this. So the next one is QuickBooks Online, and this is probably a fan favorite. Lot of applicability and benefits, so we reduce double data entry. And let's go through each of these, this Zap and how this would look. So QuickBooks Online has one goal, and that goal is to sync transactions so that development and accounting are on the same page. This Zap is going to add revenue transactions, so donations, recurring donation payments, and pledge payments, to QuickBooks Online as customers and sales receipts. The workflow starts with a new transaction in Bloomerang. You'll see that we're setting some initial criteria for donations, recurring donation payments, and pledge payments with a minimum amount of a penny. That way we don't get any in-kind or other transactions of $0. We could optionally use the new transaction payment trigger for a slightly different configuration, but in this case, we'll use new transaction. From there, we'll generally need 2 or 3 formatting steps to convert fields like campaign into income accounts and classes. Now, we're not going to go into complete detail about how to set up these utilities. They are in your Zap template if you use this, and we'll have some documentation on that. But effectively, what we're doing is we're converting Bloomerang fields, in this case, the campaign name, to a QuickBooks class or income account ID in a table. This is a lookup table. And what we're able to do is that when we go to the sales receipt, we can actually map in that converted value as a product service, an income account, or a class so that we get the appropriate mapping to our QuickBooks sales receipt. Similarly to how we do find or create constituent, we'll find or create a customer. This isn't required, but it's recommended when you create sales receipts, and that way you can append this sales receipt to a particular customer right here. Now, once these sales receipts are added to QuickBooks, you're ready to log a bank deposit. Generally, this integration will be configured to log sales receipts to the undeposited funds asset account on your balance sheet, at which point you can create deposits in QuickBooks that include the sales receipts added via integration. An example would be a disbursement deposit from a payment processor. You could add the sales receipts in that deposit, subtract the payment processing fees, and that deposit will reconcile with your bank statement. QuickBooks Online integration with Bloomerang creates what we call a triple reconciliation. First, every transaction from Bloomerang goes to QuickBooks. Second, you're creating deposits and reconciling those with your bank deposit. And third, you reconcile those bank deposit amounts against your bank statement at the end of the month. Pretty exciting way to increase some accuracy and reduce double data entry. Obvious benefits to this type of integration: we get custom mapping of any Bloomerang field, campaigns, appeals to income accounts and classes. And most importantly, accounting and development have the same data. Whether accounting is logging into QuickBooks or you're logging into Bloomerang, the data will show the same. Now, for those that want more control over their data, and a QuickBooks integration can develop a clearinghouse. Clearinghouse sends transactions from Bloomerang to a Google Sheet and then requires approval before being sent to QuickBooks. We do have templates for that, a 2-step Zap for new transactions to a Google Sheet. Once that Google Sheet adds a row, it triggers a second Zap here. Only continues if you approve it, maybe a yes flag or a go flag or something in the Google Sheet, and then continues on with creating a sales receipt. This is an exciting option if you'd like more control over your data before it goes into QuickBooks Online. So Diana, let's take a quick pause and take a couple of questions and see where people are at.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. We have a question here of it looks like it's easy enough, but at the same time, there might be some complex concepts to grasp. What
Yep.
kind of a person, like, do you need someone with a computer science degree to be building your Zaps for you?
On the computer science end, absolutely not. Um, Zapier is designed for a non-developer user to build integrations. I would say that it requires some skills in understanding workflows. So where things start, where they end, and potentially the conditions involved in those workflows. I would also say that I would not recommend new users dive straight into building custom zaps. I would strongly encourage you to use one of the templates that we've designed for specific use cases as a way to recognize whether there are gaps or questions or things that you might improve upon, but it'll at least give you a baseline level. And as of right now, there will be 15 Zap templates covering Eventbrite, PayPal, Google Sheets, Gmail, QuickBooks, and a couple of others. It's a good question, but I would start with templates.
Absolutely. That's why the templates are there. This is how we recommend that you use them. You can always customize them as needed, but it's a good starting point. And if you're looking to do something similar for an app that we haven't built a template for example, if you're not using Eventbrite, you're using another app for event registration and ticket sales, you could still potentially follow the same process
Yes, yes.
mirroring that template.
Let's do one more, Diana, see if there's a good one.
Absolutely. We're getting some questions as well. I'll put the link in the chat of where you can find the different apps that Zapier integrates with. But we're also getting some questions about we have some customers who use some apps who advertise that they integrate with Zapier, but are not finding them when they search for them on Zapier.
Great question.
What's happening there?
Yes. So some apps have not launched publicly. If the vendor says that they have an app, they most likely do. And you will need to get a private invite link from that vendor that allows you access to their app. Not every app is public, like Bloomerang Zap, and you'll need to get the invite link in order to access it. Now, it's important also to keep in mind that even if the app that you're looking for is not in Zapier, there are still ways to integrate it with Bloomerang. We don't want people to think that this is just a one kind of a only these apps apply. There's lots of expansive opportunities to integrate other applications that may not have a Zapier app. But for those that market that they do have one, you need to ask for their private Zapier link, and that will get you connected to their app.
Great, thank you so much. I think those are the questions at the moment.
Great. Well, let's get through two other Zap templates, one with PayPal and one with G Suite, and then we can wrap with more questions. So the first one is PayPal. We have a template for this. This is syncing successful one-time and recurring sales to a constituent's timeline. When a new successful sale is triggered in PayPal, we can find or create a constituent in Bloomerang, create a donation, and potentially, if you'd like to, update the constituent's information to reflect those that were recently sent through the PayPal trigger. So if I jump into this, your Zap might look something like this. You have your successful sale in PayPal. We've talked about find or create constituent in Bloomerang and logging the donation. And then we could update the constituent. Let's say that there's a new billing address that's submitted through PayPal. We could choose the constituent, get their ID, and then map in a new primary address, street, city, state, and postal code to ensure that your constituent data is up to date. We talked a little bit about this when we did an earlier question answer period, but the benefits of using a PayPal or Square or Stripe integration is that you don't have to enter that information into Bloomerang manually. We can do all the mapping and automate that process when they come in real time. One of the other advantages of using a PayPal or a Shopify is that you can explore new ways to engage with constituents in an e-commerce platform, maybe selling physical, digital, or potentially symbolic products. And all of those can be mapped into Bloomerang for revenue-based reporting. So let's talk about G Suite. We had some feedback earlier in the session that people were interested in notifications via email. And so we can actually do that with G Suite. I do want to emphasize that anything we talk about with respect to G Suite can be modeled for Office 365. So if you're an Office 365 user and not a G Suite user, all of the use cases that we're going to describe here today are applicable to Office 365. So when you operate a large team or you have many individuals entering information into Bloomerang, it might be helpful to get notified when things are entered in Bloomerang that require follow-up or just need someone's eyeballs on it. And we explored Slack integration earlier, but email notifications is an obvious choice. We're going to merge two Zap templates, one with Google Sheets and one with Gmail. I'd like to show you that here, where when we have a new transaction in Bloomerang, we're actually going to send an email to a member of our team that includes the information about that donation. We can include a link to that transaction in Bloomerang. And you can see here that this template also includes a call to action to prompt the person who's receiving this email to give this constituent a call. At the same time, we might want to populate that transaction into a spreadsheet. The columns of your spreadsheet would be added here dynamically, and you could simply just log this information into your spreadsheet as individual keys. This spreadsheet could be used for an automated dashboard, could be used just for reference. You might use it to export and send to another individual who doesn't have access to Bloomerang. You could send it to your accountant, all sorts of things that you could do with this spreadsheet, logging this information coming from a new transaction in Bloomerang. Remember that when you save a record, that's what triggers these Bloomerang action or these Bloomerang triggers to run. So I save a donation, click the save button, Zap runs. Another donation, save, Zap runs. So we talked a little bit about the benefits. Before we open it up for questions, I do want to emphasize that there are other popular apps that can integrate with Bloomerang. Shopify, WooCommerce, Square. I know there's a lot of Square fans out there. Constant Contact, Gravity Forms, even marketing suites like HubSpot, Google Forms. And again, there's over 2,000 apps at the zapier.com/apps website. I want to conclude with two slides. One is on Bloomerang to Bloomerang integrations. If you want to create automated workflows from Bloomerang to Bloomerang, you can do that with Zapier. I'll give you an example. Let's say a donor gives over a cumulative amount this year. You can tag that same account with a constituent custom field indicating that they're in your giving circle. So all the little data entry tasks and the user manuals that you have in your organization of when a transaction comes in, do this, or when a constituent does this, do this in Bloomerang, a lot of that can be automated with Zapier so you don't have to remember to do those manual data entry steps. So again, if you'd like to get set up with Zapier, we recommend 5 steps. Sign up for an account, connect to Bloomerang, get your apps connected to Zapier, use a template, and then turn on a Zap and see what happens. there's really no harm in turning on a Zap and seeing how it runs. Zaps only trigger one by one. So if you don't like what it looks like, you can turn it off. It's very easy to toggle these Zaps on and off. There's just a switch on and off. Final thought. As we conclude this presentation today and open it up for questions, I want to emphasize that when you think about integrations, Bloomerang should be the center of your technology. So all of the apps, this hub in the wheel that you're creating with integrations and automations, Bloomerang sits at the center. It's very important to have that principle in mind. It'll help ensure that your integrations are accurate and that your data is flowing to the appropriate places. So again, my name's Jeff Hagwood. I do have an email address here. If you have any questions or be curious about Zapier, I'm happy to answer those for you. I do want to note that our team does consulting for Bloomerang Zaps. If you're looking for someone to help you with the heavier lifts of integrating Zapier with Bloomerang, we're certainly here to help. I do want to emphasize, using Zapier, using templates, is included in your Bloomerang license. The Bloomerang app is available for you to use in your Zapier account. Consulting is not required. So we don't want to make you think that you can't do this with templates. You absolutely can. So please do use those templates and get engaged with Zapier because we think it's a great tool. Great. Diana, I'm happy to stay on as long as people want for questions.
Thank you so much, Jeff. That was a lot of information that you gave us today. We did get some questions about, can we start using Zapier now with Bloomerang?
Absolutely. Yep. So you can actually go to, let's go here. If you go to zapier.com/apps, you can search for Bloomerang. Here's the Bloomerang page. You can sign up for a Zapier account here, or you can click this plus button. And why don't I go ahead and just put this in the chat so everyone can get this link. There we go.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jeff. And we've also gotten some questions around pricing. Could you show us on Zapier's page where that is?
Yep. Zapier.com/pricing. The pricing information is laid out by the number of tasks that you process per month. Tasks are based on actions. So if we look at a Zap workflow, let's do this one here. Let me expand this down. Okay. So this Zap here is from Bloomerang, new transaction, to QuickBooks Online. If you ran this Zap, it would count for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tasks per Zap run. So if you processed 5 transactions, 5 steps, you would need a plan with at least 25 tasks. And the plans go up incrementally from there. One of the things about Zapier that's important to consider is that you'll likely find the number of hours you're saving to considerably outpace the cost of your Zapier account. Our team uses over 40 Zaps internally, and we've estimated that we save just over 20 hours a month worth of busy work, and it more than pays for itself.
Absolutely. There is, of course, your time costs money as well. So for me personally, Bloomerang uses Zapier as well, and it saves us a lot of hours. That automation really saves us a lot of hours. So that's great. Thank you so much to everyone for attending today. We have one last question here that I think we haven't gotten to. Does Zapier integrate API accounts?
Great question. So I mentioned earlier that Zapier will integrate with apps that are not in the Zapier app directory. If an app has an API, And there are other options, even if they don't have an API. There are still possibilities for integrating with Zapier. So if you don't find the Zap that you're looking for in the Zapier app directory, please do reach out. There's a very high likelihood that it can still be integrated with Zapier, which takes advantage of Bloomerang's integrated functionality in Zapier. It's a much more economical way to build integrations by using Zapier with Bloomerang.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We at Bloomerang are very excited about this Zapier integration, and we're very excited for our customers to see where you guys will take it, because we've mentioned several times that Zapier has an integration with over 2,000 different apps. So whatever it is that you're using, we hope that you can find some way to better automate your processes and work better with Bloomerang. And thank you so much to Jeff and your team. They have been wonderful helping us develop this integration. We've already had some customers that have been consulting with them and have been very happy with the consulting process. So thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Diana. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Bye.